Welcome to Truth Behind History, where we separate fact from fiction and dive deep into the past to uncover the truth. Today, we're tackling one of the most persistent historical misconceptions of all time, the flat Earth myth. If you've ever heard that people in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat, or that Christopher Columbus had to prove it was round, you might be surprised to learn that this is actually a myth itself. The truth is, educated people have known the Earth is a sphere for thousands of years. But somehow, the idea that people used to believe in a flat Earth has stuck around. So how did this misconception begin? Why do people still believe it? And what does the real history tell us? In this video, we'll explore the origins of the flat Earth myth, how ancient scholars proved the Earth was round, and why this misinformation refuses to go away even today. Let's start by addressing the common assumption that, for most of history, people thought the Earth was flat. This idea seems to make sense on the surface. After all, when you stand on the ground and look around, the Earth looks flat. But the idea that past civilizations truly believed in a flat Earth is largely a modern invention. In reality, the concept of a spherical Earth has been widely accepted among educated people for well over 2,000 years. The notion that medieval Europeans, or ancient civilizations, thought the Earth was flat is actually a product of the 19th century. So why do so many people today think that earlier societies believed in a flat Earth? The answer lies in a mix of misrepresentation, historical simplifications, and, more recently, the spread of misinformation. Now, let's break this down further and look at what ancient scholars actually knew about the Earth's shape. Now, let's step back in time, way back, to the ancient world, where some of the greatest minds in history were already figuring out the true shape of our planet. Despite what you may have heard, the idea that the Earth is a sphere isn't some modern discovery. Scholars from ancient Greece, and even earlier civilizations, had already gathered evidence that pointed to a round Earth. They weren't just guessing either. These were logical, mathematical, and observational conclusions. Let's start with one of the most impressive calculations in history, Eratosthenes' measurement of the Earth's circumference. Eratosthenes was a Greek scholar living in Egypt around 240 BCE. He noticed that, at noon on the summer solstice, the sun cast no shadow in the city of Sin because it was directly overhead. But at the same time, in Alexandria, which was several hundred miles to the north, objects did cast shadows. This meant the Earth's surface had to be curved. Using basic geometry, he measured the angle of the shadow and calculated that the Earth's circumference was about 25,000 miles, an astonishingly accurate estimate considering the tools he had at the time. His work provided one of the first scientific proofs that the Earth was not only round, but measurable. But he wasn't the only one with evidence. Aristotle, centuries earlier, had observed something that anyone paying close attention could see. During a lunar eclipse, when the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, the shadow it casts on the moon is always curved. No matter where the eclipse is viewed from, the shadow's edge is round, proving the Earth itself must be a sphere. If the Earth were flat, its shadow would look very different, possibly like a straight line or even an irregular shape. Then we have Pythagoras, who, long before Aristotle and Eratosthenes, proposed that the Earth must be spherical based on symmetry and harmony. Now, to be fair, Pythagoras was more of a philosopher than a scientist, and some of his ideas were based on abstract reasoning rather than direct observation. But even so, the concept of a round Earth was already taking root in intellectual circles well before the Common Era. So, the idea of a spherical Earth wasn't some radical thought that appeared out of nowhere. It was based on observations, logic, and eventually mathematical proof. With that in mind, let's fast forward a bit and address a major misconception, the idea that people in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. Was this really the case? Let's find out. Now, let's talk about the Middle Ages. If you've ever been told that medieval people thought the Earth was flat, you might be surprised to learn that this is completely false. The idea that medieval scholars believed in a flat Earth is actually a myth created in the 19th century. In reality, medieval scholars had access to the writings of ancient Greek and Roman thinkers, and they continued to build upon their knowledge. Figures like Thomas Aquinas, one of the most influential philosophers of the Middle Ages, openly accepted the idea of a spherical Earth. The same goes for Islamic scholars, who preserved and expanded upon Greek scientific knowledge during Europe's so-called Dark Ages. Islamic astronomers not only accepted that the Earth was round but made further refinements in measuring its size and studying its movements. And what about the Catholic Church? Many assume the Church officially promoted the idea of a flat Earth, but this simply isn't true. Medieval scholars, including those within the Church, relied heavily on classical Greek and Roman texts, which clearly stated that the Earth was a sphere. In fact, medieval universities taught astronomy based on the works of Aristotle and Ptolemy, both of whom described the Earth as round. So, where did this misconception come from? The answer lies in the 19th century, when certain writers, particularly Washington Irving, wanted to paint the medieval period as backward and ignorant. The idea of a flat earth believing Middle Ages was exaggerated to create a dramatic contrast between the so-called superstitious past and the scientific progress of later centuries. But as we now know, this was simply not the case. The notion of a spherical earth was well established long before the Middle Ages, and educated people throughout medieval Europe and the Islamic world fully understood this. Now, speaking of Washington Irving, let's take a closer look at how he and other 19th century writers played a key role in spreading the false idea that people once widely believed in a flat earth. Alright, let's tackle one of the biggest misconceptions out there, the idea that Christopher Columbus set sail to prove the earth was round. This is one of the most well-known historical myths, but it's completely false. By the time Columbus embarked on his famous journey in 1492, the idea of a spherical earth was already common knowledge among scholars, navigators, and even ordinary sailors. Columbus wasn't facing some council of flat earth-believing skeptics trying to stop his journey. The real debate wasn't about the shape of the earth, it was about its size. Columbus believed he could reach Asia by sailing west, but the problem was that his calculations were wrong. He severely underestimated the earth's circumference. Scholars at the time, including those in the Spanish court, knew that the earth was much larger than Columbus claimed. They believed, correctly, that his journey westward to Asia would be much longer than he expected, and they were right. If the Americas hadn't been in the way, Columbus and his crew likely wouldn't have made it. So where did the idea come from that Columbus had to prove the earth was round? Enter Washington Irving. In the early 1800s, Irving, an American writer best known for the legend of Sleepy Hollow, wrote a highly fictionalized biography of Columbus. In it, he dramatically portrayed Columbus as a visionary battling against ignorant, religious leaders who still believed in a flat earth. This wasn't based on real history, it was pure storytelling, meant to make Columbus seem like a hero defying superstition. And just like that, a myth was born. People started believing that Columbus was the man who proved the earth was round, despite the fact that educated Europeans had already known this for centuries. Now, let's take a closer look at how Washington Irving and other 19th century writers helped shape the false idea that people throughout history believed in a flat earth. So, if educated people throughout history knew the earth was a sphere, why do so many people today believe the myth that past civilizations thought otherwise? The answer lies in a combination of bad history, exaggerated storytelling, and deliberate misrepresentation, all of which gained traction in the 19th century. Let's start with Washington Irving. As we just mentioned, in 1828, Irving published a heavily fictionalized biography of Christopher Columbus, in which he portrayed Columbus as a lone genius fighting against ignorant religious authorities who insisted the earth was flat. In reality, Columbus' contemporaries weren't arguing about the shape of the earth, they were arguing about the feasibility of his proposed route. But Irving's dramatic retelling became wildly popular, and for many readers, it became the version of history. But Irving wasn't the only culprit. The 19th century was a time of rapid scientific progress, and some writers and thinkers wanted to paint the past as a period of ignorance and superstition to highlight modern advancements. This led to the flat earth myth being used as a way to make medieval scholars, and especially the Catholic Church, look anti-science. This is where the anti-religious narrative comes in. Some 19th century writers, particularly those who were critical of organized religion, found it useful to depict the church as a suppressor of knowledge. They falsely claimed that religious leaders had insisted on a flat earth and that science had to fight against this ignorance to reveal the truth. But as we now know, medieval scholars, including those within the church, had long accepted that the earth was a sphere. And then there were the Victorian misrepresentations. In the 19th century, many authors exaggerated the supposed ignorance of the medieval period to dramatize scientific progress. They wanted to paint a picture of history where people once believed in absurd things, only to be saved by science in later centuries. The flat earth myth fit perfectly into this narrative. So, by the late 19th century, the idea that people once widely believed in a flat earth was firmly embedded in popular culture, even though it wasn't based on historical reality. And unfortunately, once a myth takes hold, it's hard to shake. But here's the real kicker: even though this false narrative was created in the 19th century, it didn't stop there. In fact, it has continued to spread well into modern times. And in today's world of social media, misinformation spreads faster than ever. Let's take a look at how the flat earth myth has made a comeback in the digital age. Now, you'd think that in an age where we have satellites, space travel, and live-streamed footage from the International Space Station, the idea of a flat earth would be completely dead. But surprisingly, in recent years, flat Earth theories have made a comeback, largely thanks to the internet and social media. So how did we get here? Why, in the 21st century, are people still arguing about something that was settled over 2,000 years ago? First, let's talk about the resurgence of flat Earth theories. In the past, believing in a flat Earth was seen as a relic of outdated thinking. But with the rise of social media, conspiracy theories of all kinds have found new life. Online communities have revived the idea, with flat Earth videos, forums, and social media influencers spreading misinformation at a rapid pace. And the more people engage with this content, the more social media algorithms push it to new audiences, creating a cycle of reinforcement. Then we have the role of misinformation. The internet has made it easier than ever for people to exist in echo chambers, spaces where they only encounter ideas that reinforce their beliefs. Flat Earth groups operate in these kinds of environments, where members reject mainstream scientific explanations and instead promote alternative narratives that seem to confirm their worldview. When misinformation spreads unchecked, it can create real distrust in scientific institutions, making it even harder to correct these misconceptions. Finally, there are the psychological factors. Many flat Earth believers don't arrive at their views through a lack of intelligence, but rather through a mix of cognitive biases, skepticism of authority, and the desire to feel like they've uncovered a hidden truth. Some people are naturally inclined to distrust official explanations and look for alternative answers, and the flat Earth theory offers a simple but dramatic way to feel like they're in on a secret that the rest of the world is supposedly ignoring. So, while the modern resurgence of flat Earth beliefs might seem ridiculous, it's actually part of a much larger pattern, one where misinformation, social media, and human psychology work together to keep myths alive. But despite the efforts of conspiracy theorists, the reality remains unchanged. The Earth is undeniably a sphere, and the scientific evidence proving this is overwhelming. Let's go over some of the strongest pieces of evidence that completely debunk the idea of a flat Earth. Alright, now let's bring in the heavy artillery, actual scientific evidence that proves, beyond any doubt, that the Earth is a sphere. While flat Earth believers might dismiss history, logic, and even their own eyes, the scientific proof is undeniable. First up, we have satellite imagery. This is the most obvious and direct evidence. We have thousands of photos and videos taken from space by NASA, the European Space Agency, SpaceX, and even independent space programs from countries around the world. These images consistently show a spherical Earth. And no, these aren't all faked by some massive global conspiracy. Many of these images come from live satellite feeds that anyone can view in real time. Then there's the Coriolis effect. If you've ever wondered why hurricanes spin counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere, this is why. The Coriolis effect is a direct result of the Earth's rotation. If the Earth were flat, we wouldn't see this predictable pattern in weather systems and ocean currents. Instead, weather and water movement would behave very differently, with no consistent rotational force shaping them. And of course, we can't forget about gravity and physics. A flat Earth would create all kinds of impossible gravitational anomalies. Gravity pulls objects toward the center of mass, which naturally results in a spherical shape over time. This is why planets, moons, and even large asteroids form spheres, because gravity doesn't work in a way that would allow a flat, disc-shaped world to exist. If the Earth were flat, we'd expect to see massive inconsistencies in gravitational force depending on where you stood, which simply isn't the case. So, whether it's photographic evidence, physical forces, or the fundamental laws of gravity, the overwhelming proof is there. The Earth is round, just as scholars have known for thousands of years. But if the evidence is so clear, why do these misconceptions still exist? Why do people cling to the idea that history was filled with flat Earth believers, despite all evidence to the contrary? Let's wrap this up by talking about the importance of historical accuracy, scientific literacy, and critical thinking. So, what can we learn from all of this? The flat Earth myth isn't just about a misunderstanding of history, it's a perfect example of how misinformation can take root and persist for centuries. Let's break it down. First, we have historical misconceptions. The belief that people in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat was never actually widespread. In reality, educated people, from ancient Greek philosophers to medieval scholars, knew the Earth was a sphere. The idea that the medieval world was ignorant about this only became popular in the 19th century, thanks to writers like Washington Irving and others who exaggerated the past to make modern science seem more revolutionary. Then, there's scientific literacy. Understanding the basic principles of science, like how gravity shapes planets, how satellites work, and how the Coriolis effect influences weather, helps prevent misinformation from spreading. Flat Earth beliefs persist largely because of a lack of scientific education and because people often dismiss overwhelming evidence in favor of conspiratorial thinking. And finally, we have the importance of critical thinking. In today's world, where misinformation spreads rapidly through social media, evaluating sources is more important than ever. Just because a claim sounds dramatic or goes against the mainstream doesn't mean it's true. The best way to fight misinformation is to question it, look at the evidence, and think critically about the sources presenting the information. So, if you've enjoyed this deep dive into historical myths and want to learn more about how history has been distorted over time, make sure to subscribe to Truth Behind History. We break down popular misconceptions, uncover hidden stories, and bring you the real facts behind the past. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and check out some of our other videos for more historical truth bombs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.